Hey, this is Laura Holyoke again, and I have the second part of our Cultural Lens overview for you. This is a lot of information on this slide, but I wanted to get it all on one slide, and I wanted to talk about Joanne Martin wrote a couple books about perspectives on culture, specifically organizational culture, but she talks about cultures can have really three different perspectives. One is an integration perspective, the second differentiation, and the third fragmentation. She says that in the integration perspective, that culture is described throughout the organization as common, and it is shared by all. It's consistently reinforced from the bottom up, top down, and across. The second perspective she talks about is a differentiation perspective. So in this perspective, it's recognized that there are inconsistencies and lack of consensus across the organization about the culture. And it doesn't mean that it's absent. It just means that there's several cultures that are recognized in the organization. And within these cultures, or between these cultures, you may have competing visions, loyalties, or subcultures. This is probably what you can imagine or find at the university. Finally, she talks about fragmentation perspective, and she says that this is the most common scenario in organizations, that across the organization there is confusion and ambiguity over what the core values are for that organization and the essential premises of what that organization wants to complete, wants to do. So no coherent vision that people can articulate or consensus over the values and goals. So just another way to look at culture, and her reading, and these are both books that I cited here, but there's shorter readings and articles on what she's written about. Bottom line is cultures are very difficult to see, especially our own. Why is that? Well, fish don't notice water because it's all around them. So the guy says, water? What the heck's water? Once you are surrounded and immersed in a culture, you forget to see it. You forget that you just don't notice it because it becomes you, you become it, which is the reason why when we go into a new organization, a new family, new group of friends, that their culture is usually what we notice the most until we are a part of that culture. Then we notice it very little. So if structure is the hard controls in organization, culture is soft controls. Its capacity to execute its strategy depends on its hard infrastructure, its organizational structure and systems, and on its soft infrastructure, its culture and norms. So I'm going to give you a minute to read this slide. Okay, not a full minute because we're ticking time on the PowerPoint. But let me read it to you. If you do not think training affects the way you approach the solution of a problem or develop your insight into it, check yourself out on the way this paragraph is written. Inside your intrinsic style resides both a resistance and a compulsion to approach new solutions. However, inside your training and experience lies a procedural resistance to simply start reading at the bottom of a page. The structural prejudice contained in the alphabet and language styles is as real as a prejudice against an attitude toward the role of the human in psychology. This is part of our culture. To start reading at the upper left-hand corner. So this is quite a bit blurry, but the main points that I want you to see on this slide is the idea of how the infrastructure of organizations. So on the bottom, the most difficult to understand and see are cultural. So if you wanted to change things in an organization, the easiest things to change and the shortest amount of time are physical. So these are the artifacts. These are processes that happen. These are tools that are used. These are structures, reporting lines. And then the second easiest is infrastructure, to change strategies, systems, measurements, how we measured productivity and rewards. And then behavior, so how people behave in organizations. So if you want to do short term, it starts at the top. It starts at structural. Long term ends up cultural, and the most difficult to change. So just something to keep in mind when we talk about changing things in an organization or changing culture in an organization. Oh, so I want to go back to this slide before. I don't think I can. One of the things I wanted to say about cultural change is people talk about, and cultural change takes a long time and it is difficult. However, culture still changes even when we aren't focusing on culture change. And cultural change can change for the better over time without us specifically focusing on it. And at the same time, it can change maybe not for the better over time, even though we are not focusing on it. So these next few slides, I want to introduce, this is Cameron and Quinn's model. It's called a competing values framework. And this talks about how different organizations fall under one of these four quadrants, mainly for what they do, how the organizations are run. So in the upper left-hand corner is the clan organization, cohesive, works like a family, mentoring, it's nurturing, it has tight social works, it's usually pretty flexible, and the focus is inward towards the individuals in the organization. In the upper right-hand corner is an adhocracy. So this is pretty dynamic. Again, it's flexible. People take a lot of risks in this sort of organization. It's quite adaptable. It's growth. It's innovative, and often prides itself on cutting-edge services and products. The lower left-hand corner, this structure is stable and inward. It favors structure and control, coordination, efficiency. Stability is important. Timeliness, efficiency, smooth processes. So this one runs like a well-oiled machine. And then finally, in the lower right-hand corner, the focus is outward and stable as well. So it's results-oriented. We get the job done. Values competition and achievement. So we're looking for our customers because the customer is always right. And achievement in the market is also what's important in this one. Oh, this is, hopefully this came out a little bit better. It looks pretty, looks a little fuzzy. Anyhow, this is a different way to look at these four. Not really different, it's the same, it's just more information in terms of the organizational characteristics, the leadership styles that fit well in these organizations, how employees are managed, what holds the organization together, how is strategy, what sort of strategies are emphasized, and then what criteria are set up for success for the organization and individuals in the organization. So I'll let you refer back to this if you want specifics. Again, here's another way to look at the competing values framework. And this orientation is listed here. The leader types, what drives value in each one of these, as well as how do we consider ourselves effective. So again, there's stability, and then there's internal maintenance, long-term versus new change in the upper left and right-hand corners, and then incremental change happens in the lower left, and fast change on the right side. Fast and new change for adhocracy and market. This also relates then I don't have a lot of information on this slide, but I have a lot of information that I want to share with you about this. So this is Hofstede's work. I introduced you to this before. It's the high power distance cultures and low uncertainty avoidance and high certainty avoidance. So if you recall, high power distance cultures are cultures and organizations where it's really hard to start at the bottom and work your way up. Usually only the upper echelons stay in the upper echelons. The bosses and supervisors, CEOs are pretty well separated from the rest of the organization. Where low power distance organizations cultures, it is easy to work your way up. There's not a lot of distance in between those that are on the front lines and those that are leading the organization. Low uncertainty avoidance means that you're okay with uncertainty, that we can take risks and be all right with that. Whereas high uncertainty avoidance, we want to know, in these cultures, we want to know exactly what's going to happen in the future. And we don't want to mess with anything. So if you look at these same ideas in the competing values framework, you can look at organizations with high power distance, high power distance and high uncertainty avoidance. So these usually have a pyramid culture, very few at the top, and quite a few at the bottom, hard to get to the top. And these are really driven by rules and regulations, lots of procedures as well. And then if we go up to the high power distance and low uncertainty avoidance, this is run much like a family. Okay, so I screwed that up. Yeah, so it just operates like a family, where the low power distance and low uncertainty avoidance. Think about a model that we're okay with uncertainty, and we don't need a lot of power. So this is kind of just a straightforward market culture. Let that drive. Whereas low power distance, you can get to the top, and high uncertainty avoidance. This is a culture or an organization that runs like a well-oiled machine, gets things done, and doesn't worry about the uncertainty in the market. And another way to look at the competing values culture, I included this quite a bit. So this is the OCI model, which is an organizational culture assessment instrument. Again, Cameron and Quinn. So you can see the 4 different kinds of cultures: collaboration, control is adhocracy, competence, market, cultivation. So this is what people say about their organizations, and you can take this instrument to determine what kind of culture your organization has. So the collaboration is the idea that we succeed by working together. The control is we succeed by getting and keeping control over. Cultivation is we succeed by growing people who fulfill our vision. And then competence is we succeed by being the best. So you work towards the impersonal on the right, personal on the left, possibilities on the bottom, and what's actually happening on the top. If you're ever bored in meetings, not that any of you ever spend time in meetings, but you can also be an observer of your own organization's culture. You can watch for emotions. You can, because they usually indicate what people value, look to see who addresses who, or who does not respond to somebody, what gets people wound up, and then look at the objects and artifacts. What is not there versus what is there. So it's kind of interesting to just take a look around at your own organization's culture when you have some time and just want to reflect. Finally, culture change. I don't have much on this other than a cartoon. And somebody says, what if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? That that's usually not a great idea for cultural change. Anyhow, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.